Welcome to Jimmy's Jobs of the Future. For a lot of the entrepreneurs that we interview, the end of the story is perhaps sitting on the beach with a gin and tonic, thinking about the successful startup that they grew and exited. But for today's guest, Sally Wynter, that's where the story started. She was on a beach in Thailand, sipping a cocktail, and was thinking why there wasn't more infused gin, and in particular, why there wasn't CBD-infused gin in the UK. It's a pretty incredible story about a young female founder who created a company from scratch. We dive into that story today.
Sally, welcome to Jimmy's Jobs of the Future.
Good to be here. It's taken a while.
But we're finally here, which is the main thing. For most entrepreneurs, the beach and the dream of the white sandy beach comes at the end. But for you, that was where the idea came from.
It did, but it was not the kind of beach that people were imagining. It wasn't white sands and sun. I was actually stuck in like a tropical storm in Thailand for 2 weeks, and I got stuck. I couldn't leave basically because of these monsoon rains. So beach, but technically a beach only.
And that was where you saw kind of infused gin for the first time.
Kind of. So what it was obviously this hadn't been in the plan in the itinerary, and I just obviously ended up getting stuck. So out of sheer boredom, I started infusing kind of local ingredients like mango, dragon fruit, and other kind of herbs and spices into like local grain spirit. I guess the closest comparison would be like vodka. And I filled up these jars, and after a couple of days, I was surprised and impressed with what came out. So that was really like the beginning of messing around with drinks.
And then you came home and decided to kind of go full time on it. And just talk us through that process of getting back and deciding that, no, this is more than just a good idea that I had on holiday, not just a holiday kind of romance type thing. This was something you were going to do full time.
Yeah, well, there was actually a little bit of a gap between when I got home. I did kind of continue to experiment. I started putting in like adaptogens, things that would do something. So yerba mate tea and doing sort of different blends for different moods, I guess, whether it was like a chilled night in or maybe something a bit more energized if we were going out, partying or clubbing. So that kind of went on when I was a student, and then it wasn't actually till a year or two after that that I eventually ended up looking at it as a sort of business opportunity.
And so how did you kind of, you're a student, it didn't have like a lot of money particularly behind you. How did you kind of come up with a name?
So the name, God, it first of all, it took absolutely ages. Like, it wasn't just like, yep, it would be called this. It was MUHU, and it was named basically after this kind of shack beach hostel thing that I was stuck in. But it took months of thinking about like names, and then they were always taken because gin, by the time I had this idea to do the CBD gin, it was sort of like November 2018. So by then you're talking like well past the start of the gin boom, and everything was trademarked.
Yeah.
So yeah, bit of a nightmare, but we got there in the end.
And was there a point where you thought, oh, I'm coming into this too late, right? Because the gin boom's kind of been going crazy for the last 10 years or so.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, people were like, okay, yeah, like it's a solid product, but the gin market's really saturated. And if it hadn't had the CBD and the uniqueness of the branding, I would have completely agreed with them. But I was just 100% convinced that CBD and gin would be this just amazing mix of basically something that people already loved, especially in the UK, we're obviously big gin drinkers, and something that people wanted to try, but they were kind of worried about stigma. There was not a lot of education at the time. People didn't really know what CBD was.
Yeah.
And the third thing was that the oils tasted awful. So basically much later in time, I started using CBD for kind of like post-exercise recovery and stuff. And then I just had this light bulb moment of, hold on, what if we can combine these two and then also make it look nothing like any other gin on the market? Because although there was like hundreds of brands, they all looked quite similar. There was a lot of like Manchester gin, Birmingham gin, this gin, that gin, very like location orientated, and quite from a design perspective, there was not a lot of innovation going on.
Yeah, there's even a gin in my sort of area of South London. So yeah, a lot of geographical stuff. And so just talk to us about the CBD aspect, right? Because this is quite a generational sort of thing, and you are much younger than me, and you're right in terms of the stigma, etc. to geriatric millennials like myself, as Eliza Philby calls me. Just talk us through what CBD is.
So essentially, it stands for cannabidiol, and it's a component. It's one of over 100 different sort of components of the cannabis plant. Mm-hmm. The only one people are familiar with is THC, which is the one that basically gets you high and is illegal. But there's lots of goodness in other parts of the plants that essentially were discovered for, people were using them for all sorts of anti-inflammatory properties and other uses, and it just blew up, I think, first in the States and then worked its way over to Europe.
And what, as is so often the case with so many entrepreneurial ideas, what was you talked about the light bulb moment earlier of like putting that in the drink. Just talk us through that.
Well, obviously it wasn't going to be like a serious health product because it was 40% gin, right? But the idea was it would just be a fun way for people to interact with it for the first time.
Yeah.
But it wasn't my first idea. My first idea that kind of got me hooked on this idea of starting a business was actually in the tech space. It was an app, and I know everyone's had $1 million idea for an app. But I think at the time, like I didn't even know anyone that had a business until 23. So I kind of came into this world quite late on. And when I kind of put the idea out there with someone that was a lot more experienced, they were really helpful. They were like, you're going to need to raise a lot of money, you're going to need to get a bunch of credibility, and you're also going to need a bunch of like a technical co-founder or someone with those kind of skill sets. And I was like, I don't even know how to register a company. Like, this is way out of like what I feel I'm capable of at the moment. So there was a mixture of like, loving food and drink and that being part of that, and kind of believing that CBD was this buzzy product. And I love the combination, the safe vessel with the more risky product. But it was also something that I thought, okay, I don't have much here. I'm earning like £10 an hour. It would need to be something that I could do, on the cheap. I don't want to have to raise money first time. And I thought, worst comes to worst, everything goes tits up. I can sell this to probably like, everyone loves gin, basically. They'll buy at cost.
Yeah.
And I'll like recoup this my savings that I've put into it. So it was also about like risk mitigation, I think, because I was, pretty bricking it to be starting a business, to be honest.
And you had £1,000, right? You cobbled that together.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, it wasn't like all in one go.
Yeah.
So it was just a few £100s saved up, like month on month, basically, where I was just putting away in a little savings account.
And that was your kind of like nest egg to get it off the ground.
Yeah, I guess. And it wasn't about spending £1,000. I was just like, I need to do this for as cheap as possible, because I think it was quite a big thing spending money on it. I didn't feel like I had enough belief in myself, I think, to be like, can someone back this idea? Because I think the whole journey was almost like, it was as much of a personal challenge of like almost a dare to myself. Like, okay, you're obsessed, but how far can you go with this idea, as it was about the product.
Yeah. And there's a lovely thing you talked about before in the past, being 23, you're saying late to the game. I know that'll make some listeners sort of smile, but you hadn't met any entrepreneurs, right? So as Herman Narula said in one of our earlier episodes, who's raised so much money, it's like extraordinary in terms of like 600 million. But you turned to Google as your friend, and what did you Google?
What is an entrepreneur? And it's actually still something I can't spell today, which I think says something. Like it does say something, I think, about the industry. It's not, the world of entrepreneurship is not that accessible, and I don't think it's necessarily meant. I kind of feel like it's not meant for people from a working class background. It is a little bit like, I mean, just the word itself, I think, is quite symbolic of that. So it felt like I definitely, and still do feel like a little bit of an imposter in these circles. But yeah, no, it's funny when you say like, some people will laugh at that, but I saw a lot of, entrepreneurs like 17, 18, setting up businesses, or that typical story of, oh yeah, when I was at school, I was selling sweets and making money on the side.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't have that growing up. Like, I just wasn't aware of it as an option. I didn't have that entrepreneurial streak early doors.
How do you think class plays into it all?
Okay, so I'll tell you one thing that I noticed, like, coming in early days, and which I found hilarious, but like I've actually not spoken about much. Friends and family rounds. So like I'd started going to these. The first thing I started to do is go to events, because I was like, okay, first of all, when I had my first idea, like it just hit me out of nowhere, basically. Like, I'd had ideas. Everyone watches Dragon's Den, you know, bands around a few ideas at the office. But when I had this first idea that I was obsessed with, I like wasn't sleeping. I was like dreaming and obsessing over like what I could do with it and what I would call it, to the point where I was like, just, you know, had complete insomnia for like weeks on end. I was like, this is really weird. I need to go and like explore this a little bit. And then I started going to events, like sort of, you know, entrepreneur networking events, just like casual things in the evening around London. And just this concept of the family and friends round, where it's like, oh yeah, so the first round we cobbled together 100, 150, 200,000 pounds on like family and friends. I think if I went to my family, friends at the time, I'd probably maybe like 500 quid all in. So.
And what events did you think were particularly good? Because it's hard to judge some of these things, isn't it? For those that are starting out on their careers, which ones were particularly helpful in the food and drink space?
Well, I didn't go specifically food and drink. I think for me, actually, the most helpful thing was just being around other people who are like me. I think like when you're talking to people who aren't of the similar mindset at that time, they can kind of look at you funny and be like, but why are you doing that? So at the time out of uni, I was freelancing in film and TV production. I was doing a bit of stuff at ITV News after I sort of won a competition, and people were like, that's an amazing career. You know, people's whole life goal is to get into ITV News. It's a really respectable news company. So people just look at you funny and kind of not really get it. So for me, you know, you go to some events, it would just be networking. Other events would have speakers, but it was always the people, like other people like me, finding other young people and bouncing ideas and just having that energy, which makes you want to go down the rabbit hole more, because it's not necessarily an easy journey. You know, any entrepreneur will say there's a lot of highs and lows. I think it's because you want it so bad and you're so obsessed with it that it's a roller coaster. So it's nice to have people that get that.
And tell us about the competition, because that's been a bit of a theme of something that you've always kind of done, right?
Yeah, I've weirdly won a competition at primary school, secondary school, and then university. And then actually, yeah, when I was going to the first ever event I went to run by the Evening Standard, I found this competition at the back that they just had barely mentioned or not mentioned at all. And it was win 4 hours of mentoring with one of these, you know, people. And I Googled everyone, not knowing any idea about who they were. And then Brent Hoberman's name was on there, and I Googled. I was like, whoa, this guy's like a huge deal in the business world. So immediately was like, hello, I'm like, I have this idea and I'm obsessed and I don't come from anything, but I have big dreams. Please, like, let me come in and do this mentoring. And I'm not even sure they had that many applications, because, you know, generally people just assume they won't get these things or they don't spend much time. Like on that actual day, I sat down and spent an hour doing the application. So yeah, competitions have had a weird.
Yeah, and you got through, right?
Yeah.
And you saw Brent for like a number of hours.
Yeah, I saw Brent. Spent time at Founders Factory, which is I think his incubator for kind of helping businesses with growth. And it was just eye-opening, really, you know, just to, first of all, sit down with someone that was obviously wildly successful, and for them to be very, like, listening to your idea as essentially a nobody.
Yep.
And then also being like, how can I help you? Who can I put you in touch with? But that was almost where I had my first failure, because I had all this opportunity come through from this. And then, you know, I basically was like, I don't think I can do this tech idea because it's just too much for me. So all of those kind of connections and stuff just slipped away. And then I kind of went back into my shell for another few months. So when you recount stories, it's always like, oh, I did this and this and this and that. But actually there was loads of periods where I didn't have the belief or confidence to actually be working on it day to day. So it's quite stop and start.
Yeah. It's well, it never is linear. And talk to us about the launch of it and how the kind of having a bit of a media background sort of helped you with that, because that was part of the big idea.
It did play one key role, but essentially I had this grand plan in my head having no experience in business before, where I thought, okay, I'm going to make a gin. It's going to have CBD. Everyone's going to go crazy for this hyped product. It's going to look weird. It's going to sound weird, and people want to talk about it. And hopefully, I'll get press. And then when I get press, orders will flow in. Supermarkets and retailers will be knocking at the door, and that did kind of happen, but it also didn't, as in terms of like retail and stuff. That was definitely a much harder slog than I imagined it, but I was just kind of making it up as I went along. But the media stuff came in very helpful, because essentially I was launching with very little money. Obviously, like when I talk about the £1,000, it's broken down to like £400 on design, £120 building the website, buying the domain, buying a template, trademarks. I think I spent £250, but I did it myself. But obviously there was quite a few £1,000s needed for like the gin, the bottles, the labels. And that was, I didn't really have the funds for that, because that was thousands of pounds, like multiple thousands. So I had this plan that if I got the press, I'd use that to generate pre-orders, and then the pre-orders I'd use mixed with credit cards to fund this first production run. So it's quite risky. But the one thing obviously I couldn't do is, you can't sell something that hasn't been made yet. So I needed product photos, and that's where my freelancing, I was still like full-time freelancing until just after the gin was launched. That's where that came in handy. So at the end of a shoot day, I got the photographer to, what we did is we filled up like the one sample bottle that I had. I printed labels. So that's the one thing I had put on the credit card. I hand stuck it to this bottle. We filled it with water, put a cap in it, broke off a bit of this plant, put it in this like glass. You could actually like Google, these images are still the product photos. They looked amazing, but it was just a bottle of water basically with the branding on. We took them, and like that's still every product shot out there. Like there's my hand holding it up against like an orange background in this kind of person's house or apartment.
Yeah, but it shows how like you can spend lots of money on needless things. It can be your hand. It doesn't need to be a model's hand to kind of.
Although someone accused me of that, like that. Someone was like, "The editing on this is terrible. That's clearly a fake hand. The sizing's all wrong." I was like, "What's wrong with my hands?"
And you've used lots of other tools as well, in terms of obviously like a drinks or any food brand that's e-com based is very kind of adaptable for social media and so on, and you've used that very effectively in terms of Instagram and also your personal brand on LinkedIn as well. Like, talk to us a bit about how you kind of marshaled that, because again, you were starting from nothing with that.
Yeah, and I felt so unqualified, and I think this is something that other people that want to start businesses or even change careers will also feel like, because people look at your LinkedIn, and I feel like when we meet people, it's almost slightly odd that we ask, well, what do you do? After like, what's your name? It's, oh, what do you do? Or where do you live? We like to put people in boxes. And so it feels really uncomfortable to be like, yeah, my CV says that I am in media, especially if you're currently working there, but I'm launching a gin brand. You're like, well, I don't have any credibility. And people can be like, why is she launching a gin brand? Like, what experience does she have to be doing that? So you feel really self-conscious. But I'd say talking about the journey on LinkedIn was not only like all these fears I had were allayed, like the response was amazing, but I discovered quite early on that network is just incredible. I had like later down the line, I had journalists contacting me through LinkedIn. I had investors contacting me. So really like the network building that I did was key. Especially with CBD, because you couldn't and still can't advertise on Facebook, on Google. And I think any product business, like if you told me now, do you want to start a product business where you can't, use online ads and advertise through social media, I'd be like, no way. Yeah. That's crazy. So there was a lot of like specific challenges with CBD particularly that almost made it a double-edged sword.
Where did you turn to for advice on all of that at the beginning?
So Google, I read blogs. I amazingly found, because like creating a spirits brand is not something that it's not as common as sort of SEO and stuff. There's not blogs everywhere. But I discovered this one blog by the Lazy Entrepreneur, I think it was called. And it was specifically, he goes and creates businesses just out of nothing. Like I think he has the top selling table tennis like paddle in the UK or something. He just does random businesses, and this was like a step-by-step 8-part blog on how he created his Pipe House Gin, I think it was, around the Tunbridge Wells area, and that was just an amazing resource. And then it was Facebook groups and just calling people. People are very uncomfortable these days with picking up the phone and just ringing someone. But when I used to ring distilleries and be like, could you work with me? What's your minimum order quantity? Even if I wasn't going to work with them, I'd be like, oh, okay, can you give me a bit of advice? 'Cause I'm actually looking to start a brand, and like, can you advise me on licenses and stuff and what I do need and don't need? So I just gathered intel like crazy from wherever I was, but they were always free resources.
This show is made possible by the fantastic support of our various partners, and I wanted to thank the Octopus Group. The Octopus Group is a collection of 8 entrepreneurially minded businesses across financial services and energy, all founded on the one simple belief that people and the planet deserve better. They are intent on building a better tomorrow for future generations and are a certified B Corp, demonstrating they care as much about the impact of their investments as the returns they generate. I am proud that Octopus have backed this show since the second series, and they are the reason why we are now able to put such a professional show together. To hear more about what they do, it is worth checking out previous episodes with the founders Chris Hewlett and Simon Rogerson, or the CEO of their investments arm, Ruth Hancock. If you want to see how you could partner with us, go to our website at www.jobsofthefuture.co.
One of the kind of key things that we ask about is like your first hire and so on, and what was the challenges and what do you think the jobs of the future are. You didn't actually hire anyone throughout the entirety of this, which is extraordinary, right? Like 7-figure exit, from nothing to that in just 3 years, and you didn't hire a single person throughout it.
It was extraordinarily stressful. That's what I would put that word at the end. Yeah, I think it was just, sheer, like, even when you start getting the orders in, that money's going straight back into the next ordering thing. And I think, like, by 3 months in, I was completely burned out. I was working 70-hour weeks. I was doing 30,000 steps, going around London with a massive backpack full of gin, going into bars. And then in between that, I was doing, like, customer queries, logistics, production stuff, accounts. Like, I was massively overworking myself. And that's when... I think so. The gin I launched in September 2019, and then by December I was like, I need to raise some money and bring on some team members. But the only thing I ever outsourced was social media, which I was the straw that broke the camel's back. I was like, I cannot be also coming up with this content. It just takes a bit of a headspace, I think.
Yes.
But I just had run out of capacity.
Yeah, no, I know that feeling all too well.
But it was lonely. It was really lonely. Like many, many times doing a business on your own, I just, I definitely pined for a co-founder, but I just did not want to break and bring someone in for no reason other than I wanted someone to talk to. It's not a good enough reason when you've put everything into something.
I mean, how were your friends throughout that period? Were you able to because it's hard, it's all consuming, right?
Yeah, it's all consuming. But this comes back to the network point. When you've built a network of other people in the drinks, food and drink world, then it's nice. You can message them, have a call, moan about stuff. Feels like you're kind of in the same boat, and that's always a nice thing to have. But my normal friends, who didn't have businesses, I think it just wasn't really the kind of thing you talked about because, it's not their world. I guess they're not interested in production line issues. Just not really, doesn't really apply.
It's not a great Friday night pub
yeah,
chat,
it's not, is it? And I definitely did too many of those. So.
And so after that kind of like 3-month period, the raising money, how did you go about that at that stage?
So what happened was I did this initial post on LinkedIn in September for the first time, speaking like, okay, I've done this mad thing. I've launched a gin brand. It's going to be called MUHU. It's like, here's a photo of a mock-up or whatever. And that went really well. And then I started getting bits in the grocer. Some journalists wanted to cover the story. It was actually the fact that the budget was so small, almost combined with the CBD and the gin, and I guess maybe a young female founder, and the press seemed to just really want to cover the story. So that was good. And then by the time it was December, I think I had a piece in a national, so like Metro or Evening Standard. So that really blew it up. Mm. So basically, by that time, like the LinkedIn network was quite good. So I put it out there. I think there was a little bit of coverage on the fact that I was raising. And then a lot of people got in touch after seeing the article. So getting investor meetings was not difficult, but it was a whole new world of like challenge when I actually went to do the meetings.
Yeah. Talk to us about
So I think it was just this, like, I'd had this crazy steep learning curve with teaching myself everything in the last like year before that. But I think when you need to defend your business as someone's actually putting money, they really bring you back down to the ground. Like, you're definitely you need to be an optimist, obviously, with your own brand. But I was very naive and very inexperienced, and as the original grand plan, I guess, shows. So they will grill you like, how much will I get back? When will I get it? Like, tell me the answers that really I probably wasn't quite qualified to meet. So, and then you need to deal with a lot of rejection. Any entrepreneur fundraising will face rejection after rejection, and that's quite tough mentally to kind of keep coming back to.
how did you use that rejection?
I think I tried to just take it as constructive criticism. So I pushed angel investors to give me specific advice as to why. And it did help me sort of to form a plan. So one of the things I did was I looked to bring on the expertise that I didn't have. Mm-hmm. So I had someone that had... a guy called Julian who used to head up global marketing for Bombay Sapphire, and I had also a second person I'd sort of constructed a deal to bring them on for a sweat equity basis, essentially. So I was taking things and doing useful bits with them, basically, and just trying to kind of keep composed about it and not bring too much emotion in.
And how did you go about that sweat equity and learning about all of that as well? Because that's quite a challenge.
Yeah. It was very much just receiving terms and then trying to talk to other people that had done similar deals and being like, is this a good deal? What should be included? What shouldn't? So I was kind of doing that alongside raising. And I kind of got to this point in February where I had this sweat equity sort of teed up. And then I also had some money on the table from a couple of angel investors. And that's actually the point where I ended up getting this acquisition offer, like a basically dangling about to do this deal, and then this other deal came onto the table. So,
yeah. So talk to us about the kind of like the exit bit, because I'm intrigued. I'm always intrigued about how those kind of conversations sort of start and so on.
Well, initially when I had the offer, I wasn't expecting it. It was just a sort of another messaging on LinkedIn. Come to our office. We'd like to meet you and discuss. We can see your fundraising. And then it was kind of like a curveball, and they're like, "Oh, here's the term sheet. Oh, but this is for acquiring the whole company. I don't want to sell the whole company." And there was definitely a strong reaction of like, "No way! I've just spent ages building this." But then I think you start to dwell on the difficult journey ahead, and also like, I had wild ambitions to make this brand into a global brand. So I was like, look, realistically, I can keep telling myself, that I'll work day and night, weekends and stuff, and bring on 2 people. But this needs some serious funding behind it. Actually maybe working with a business with global reach could do that for the brand. And that wasn't the original idea. And then obviously the other side of it plays where you're like, well, I've got very little in savings, and this would be like very life-changing for me, not just from a financial perspective, but also from, I guess, reaching that global halo of what people see exited entrepreneurs as.
Yeah, the social capital that it brings. But how was that going in and sort of thinking that you're getting because it's a certain mindset to go into an investor meeting, right? You've got to be, as you were alluding to before, you've got to be quite pumped up, probably expecting a no. I mean, that is quite a sort of turnaround in that sort of environment to say, well, we'd like to buy the whole thing.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I never went into any investor meeting assuming no, right? I was always endlessly optimistic and then just dealt with it if it wasn't what I expected. But it was definitely not something I expected, but it was not actually the only kind of acquisition offer I'd had, bizarrely, even though this whole period was only 5 months after launch. But yeah, the other big caveat was, as I was considering this, lockdown 1 hit. So no one knew where that was going to go at the time, but it definitely threw something else into the mix where suddenly the pub listings I just secured and stuff all looked quite uncertain, were going quiet and stuff.
And then, so talk us through what happens then. lockdown one hits, you basically accept the kind of acquisition offer and
Yeah, like it's kind of sign on the dotted lines for the terms, and then you spend a long time, padding out what exactly that deal is in the full contract, and that took many, many, many months basically. So throughout all of this, I wasn't really. I definitely am an optimist, but there's always something that's like I didn't want to believe it was going to happen, because if I believed it was going to happen, it was like, I'd start looking at like houses in my like dream location and thinking, wow, I could live here and do this and have this, and I could do any business I wanted, not just based on what I thought could actually make me money. Like I had to stop myself from dreaming too much and like keep my feet firmly on the ground and just assume this is not going to go through, which I did believe every day until the money hit the bank.
yeah.
Literally. And then even then, it did not set in. Like still partially it hasn't set in. It's such a like for me, it was so life-changing. It honestly was so not something I saw in my future when I was younger that it's still weird thinking about it today, to be honest.
Has it sunk in yet?
Yeah, like kind of. But like when I ended up buying that like dream house, and when I walk out and I'm a 10-minute walk from the Thames, I still can't believe that I'm there, because I used to, I'm big into my cycling, and I used to do these huge loops around London. And just over a year before the exit, I'd been in that location being like, maybe when I'm in my 40s, I'll be able to like afford somewhere here. And then like, I just had no idea that was coming 1 year later. So it was very surreal.
And do you still have imposter syndrome with it now?
I think I've got to like an okay place. I think I'll never stop having imposter syndrome to a degree. But actually, I think what I did note is that for about 6 months after the exit, I didn't give myself any credit. I was like, it was pure luck, right place, right time. And although obviously luck definitely has something to do with it, I put myself in those situations. Like the article that had gone out, I'd done that PR template, I'd like put it out, I'd chased journalists. So I'm a firm believer that basically luck is a mixture of like when preparation meets opportunity. And, you can control it's a great quote. But you can have a lot of input into how luck finds you, basically.
Yeah, you can. Well, it's also the harder you try and the more shots you take as well, right? Like, just the luckier you get.
Exactly. What is it like? You miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Totally.
Like if you're not in the room, you're not going to get that opportunity. So just always be there. And I was like that. I was like, oh my God, I can't miss this networking thing. What if I coincidentally meet the person that's going to invest and change my next 5 years? Like I was very much like that, almost to a fault that was like damagingly, like just too much overworking, basically. Too much overworking.
And how has the money changed you?
I don't think it has too much from a personality perspective, I hope. Maybe my friends will tell me differently. But it just gives you a bit of security and comfort in life. Like just knowing, well, I can pick my next project. I can do it on passion. I don't need to be thinking about, it's just comfort, basically. It's peace of mind. It's knowing like you can go and choose what you want to do, which was always the dream. It wasn't to retire early and then sit on a beach. It was always like, I do love to work. I love people. I love to be challenged, but I want to choose what those are because I'm interested in, like, I want to follow passion, not practicality.
Yes, absolutely. Well, we're going to come to that very much in the second half and the bonus bit of the episode. Thanks so much so far. It's been amazing insight.
Lovely talking to you.
Thanks for listening to Jimmy's Jobs. One of the ways that we make this show possible is by the partners that we have that support us. They can be like today's, like the Octopus Group or the FinTech Alliance, but also we've done more consumer-facing brands like Primary Bid and Beer 52. You can go to our website and check out more details at www.jobsofthefuture.co. The other way the show is made possible is by me going into organisations and talking about jobs of the future and the talent that is required to fill those jobs, how you retain them, how you attract them, and how great teams are built that can achieve superb things that we hear about on this show. If you want to know more on that, drop us a line at hello@jobsofthefuture.co. We always love hearing from our listeners,